In the coldest and most forgotten region of Lower Silesia, there's a village that barely appears on maps. The houses are made of old wood, creaking with the wind, and the dirt roads always seem muddy, even on dry days. In this place lived the couple Yannick and Clara, known only by some travelers who dared to get lost in those parts. They lived in a house away from the village, surrounded by dense forest, where the tree branches seemed to curve over the roof like fingers trying to enter through the chimney. Yannick was a sacred art restorer, but his neighbors said he worked with things forgotten by God. One day he brought home an ancient piece, a wooden reliquary with carved symbols that no one could identify. He said it came from an abandoned church near the border, where priests had disappeared decades ago. On the first night, the object was placed on the living room shelf. Clara began to hear voices coming from the attic, even though the attic had been empty and sealed for years. From the second week on, Yannick began having memory lapses. He forgot to eat, forgot where he was, forgot his own name for minutes. Clara found him one night kneeling in the basement, with eyes rolled back and repeating words in a language that seemed like a mixture of Latin with Old Polish. In the third week, Yannick disappeared. Clara woke up and there were no traces of him. No footprints, no clothes, no warmth on the pillow. Only the reliquary, now open, with a kind of dark resin dripping along the edges. Clara tried to ask for help from the village residents, but no one dared to go up to her house. They said she had already been marked. Days later, neighbors reported screams coming from the forest. When finally a group of brave men went there, they found Clara hanging by her wrists from the roof, as if she had been impaled from bottom to top, with eyes sewn with barbed wire. The reliquary? It was no longer there. Only a drawing on the floor made with blood, a circle with 3 intertwined eyes. In the following months, other village residents began to disappear, one by one, and always on windy nights. Today, that village no longer exists. There are only ruins, and those who step there say they hear a forgotten language echoing in the air, coming from the ground. We cross the ocean and arrive at a small town in the interior of Thailand, where a young woman named Anong cared for her sick grandmother in a silent home. Anong worked as an independent caregiver and was known for her kindness. But her grandmother said disturbing things, that she saw faceless men walking on the ceiling, that at night the food in the kitchen moved by itself. Anong always thought it was age-related delirium. Everything changed when, on a June afternoon, Anong discovered a small mirror hidden inside her grandmother's pillow. An old mirror with a cracked frame and a symbol engraved on the glass, an inverted triangle with an open mouth in the center. Since she touched the mirror, she began dreaming of a room where there were no doors, only windows that looked out onto a living, pulsing darkness. These dreams became visions during the day. She saw strangers reflected in the bathroom mirror, people who weren't there, with wet clothes, as if they had drowned. One day, during her bath, she saw her own image smiling alone. When she turned to flee, the image in the mirror came out of the glass. The grandmother was found with eyes rolled back, skin stretched as if she had screamed for hours. Anong disappeared. The following month, 5 children from the village also vanished. All of them had touched the mirror, which now sat on a makeshift altar in the local temple. No one knows who put it there. Today, they say the mirror is covered with 7 cloths and kept inside a locked safe. But sometimes, during certain nights, the cloths are found on the floor and the mirror fogged from inside, as if someone, or something, was breathing there. Now we go to northern Argentina, in a village forgotten by maps and time. A group of young explorers decided to record ruins of an old Jesuit mission, wrapped in legends about pacts with pagan entities. One of them, called Matthias, was obsessed with ancient rituals. While searching through the crypt of a demolished church, he found a manuscript hidden inside a skull. The text spoke of a final harvest feast, where an entity called El Cuervo que come sombras, the crow that eats shadows, appeared to take the most impure soul among those present. Matthias wanted to test it. The following night, he performed the ritual alone, inside the crypt. He did everything as described, drew circles with charcoal, lit black candles, and recited verses whose meaning he didn't even know. When he left the crypt, he was no longer the same. His eyes were opaque, and his voice seemed to come from a burned throat. The next morning, all his friends were dead, not from injuries, but from self-destruction. One of them pulled out his own teeth with a fork. Another plunged his head into a bucket of acid used to clean metals. Police found Matthias walking naked through the trails, smiling and repeating, "He now lives in me." The manuscript disappeared from the morgue where Matthias's body was taken, and the entire city refuses to comment on what happened. They only say, "If you hear crows during the night, flee before your shadow is eaten." In the frozen north of Canada, in an indigenous community almost inaccessible during winter, there exists a story that the elders avoid telling, fearing that its mere mention might invoke terror again. The central character is Elliot, a local hunter known for his courage. Too much, according to some. When darkness settles before the sun even disappears, something known as that which must not be named begins to wander through the forest. Elliot, on the night when everything changed, decided to hunt alone despite the warnings. He saw something strange, giant footprints that disappeared into a frozen swamp. In the middle of the fog, he heard a sound that seemed like a human lament, but distorted, as if it were a chorus of desperate voices. When he tried to flee, he felt an invisible hand grab his ankle and pull him into the frozen mud. He only saved himself because a colleague who followed him managed to pull him out, but not without something touching his face. Burned skin, frozen eyes. Since that night, Elliot can no longer sleep. In his dreams, he sees a figure covered in ice that speaks in a language no one else understands, repeating, "The hunter becomes the hunted." Some residents claim he is no longer the same and that his shadow sometimes walks alone through the forests during the day, like a warning. Further east, in the mountains of Romania, there's a village so isolated that many residents of nearby regions don't even believe it exists. It's a place where sunlight rarely touches the ground. The protagonist here is Andrei, an amateur archaeologist who sought ancient inscriptions from pre-Christian tribes. He found buried in a cave an altar made of human bones intertwined with roots that seemed to pulse, almost as if they were alive. The night he took a stone from the altar to his chalet, things began to fall apart. Andrei heard footsteps in the snow even when there were no footprints around the house. The air became heavy, and he smelled a strong odor of iron and disturbed earth. Gradually, Andrei began to behave erratically. Residents said he talked to voices only he heard and, at night, disappeared for hours, returning with skin covered by cuts made by nails, but not human ones. One morning they found Andrei's body in the middle of the forest, hanging from a tree by the neck, but without marks on the neck. Apparently, he had hanged himself, but no knot was found. What's most frightening is that in the place where he was found, the snow never melted, even with summer heat. And the altar in the cave disappeared without leaving traces, as if it had never existed. Are you feeling that chill growing? Want to know what comes next? I can guarantee that the stories get even more intense, more frightening. And since we're here, let me make you an invitation that's not that standard request you're tired of hearing. If these stories are messing with you, comment below which one you found most disturbing. And if you have the courage, share an experience of yours that left you with goosebumps, or even a feeling of fear you can't explain. Let's create a space where fear is real, but courage too, and we learn together, exchange stories, and grow. Oh, and if you're not part of our community yet, take the opportunity to subscribe and activate notifications, because there are many more sinister stories coming, and I want you here, so we can go through this together. In the interior of South Africa, in a small village forgotten among the Drakensberg Mountains, there exists an account that mixes ancient ancestral beliefs and visceral horror. The protagonist is Nomvula, a young village healer known for her skills in natural medicines and spiritual rituals. The story begins when she receives an unexpected visit. A mysterious man, wrapped in a black cloak, asks her to cure a disease that no one in the village knows how to explain. The man's condition is serious. His eyes are completely black without white, and he doesn't speak, only emits guttural sounds that freeze the blood. Nomvula accepts the challenge, but soon realizes that the disease is something far beyond the physical. It's as if an evil spirit had taken over the man's body, and this spirit wanted something in return. On the third night of treatment, Nomvula begins having horrible nightmares, in which she is dragged to an underground cave, where dozens of skeletons rise and begin singing a frightening melody calling her name. Upon waking, she finds claw marks on her body and realizes she is no longer alone. Something watches her from the village shadows. The situation worsens when other people begin disappearing without explanation. In the end, we discover that the mysterious man was not human, but an ancestral creature, responsible for punishing those who disturb the sacred balance of the earth. Nomvula is the only one who survives, but she carries the curse and the black gaze that will never leave her. Meanwhile, in Japan, in a small town near Mount Fuji, the story of Haruto, a photographer of abandoned places, becomes a nightmare of unimaginable proportions. Haruto liked exploring deactivated schools and hospitals to capture unique images. Once he visited an old psychiatric clinic, famous for closing after reports of abuse and mysterious deaths. During exploration, Haruto found an old diary that belonged to a patient who claimed to be trapped between two worlds. From there, strange events began. Shadows that moved on their own, whispers that came from nowhere, and photos that showed distorted figures he didn't see when taking the images. The obsession with understanding what was happening led Haruto to return several times to the clinic, until one night he disappeared without leaving traces. Days later, they found his cameras at the clinic entrance, with hundreds of photos showing scenes of terror. Among them, images of Haruto being pulled by invisible hands to the basement while a scream cut through the night's silence. To this day, residents claim to hear strange chants and see a figure of a man carrying a camera wandering through the forest around the clinic, as if trapped forever in that space between life and death. Want to continue discovering what these dark worlds still hold? There's still a lot of fear to come. But before moving forward, how about you tell us, which of these accounts affected you most? Have you ever felt something similar? A sensation you can't explain? It doesn't need to be a perfect story. We just want to hear your fear, your mystery. And if you're not part of the family here on the channel yet, take the opportunity and subscribe so you don't miss any chapter of these stories. I promise we'll keep the suspense, the terror, and of course that sincere conversation that makes you feel at home, even when the subject is fear. In the interior of Russia, in a frozen village that seems forgotten in time, lives Irina, an art restorer who was called to work in an old abandoned convent, known in the region as the House of Whispers. The building was full of deteriorated, religious paintings, and Irina had the challenge of restoring them for a nearby museum. But she didn't know that those walls held something far beyond art. From the first days, incomprehensible sounds began echoing through the corridors. The cold seemed to pierce bones, and indistinct figures appeared in the shadows, always at dusk. One night, while restoring a painting, Irina noticed that the eyes of the depicted figure seemed alive, following her every movement. What was art became a door to terror when the painting began to bleed, and ancient voices, in forgotten languages, began whispering forbidden secrets. Gradually, Irina found herself trapped in a web of supernatural events. People from the village began disappearing, and objects moved by themselves in the convent. At the story's climax, Irina discovers that the painting was a seal that kept a demonic entity trapped, but by restoring it, she broke the balance. Terror explodes when the creature emerges, and Irina has to fight for her sanity and life, trying to seal the evil again, but at what cost? In the end, the convent collapses and only stories remain, and a warning: never mess with what you don't understand. In another part of the world, in Colombia, more precisely in a mountainous region surrounded by dense forests, a group of young urban explorers encounters an abandoned hospital where they say illegal medical experiments happened for decades. The protagonist here is Lucia, a biologist who decided to accompany the group to document local fauna, but finds herself plunged into a much greater nightmare. Upon entering the hospital, The group finds rooms full of rusty equipment, endless corridors, and soon, disturbing traces. Flasks with unknown substances, poorly preserved bodies, and records of experiments on humans. During exploration, they begin feeling invisible presences, doors that close by themselves, and a growing sensation that they are being hunted. At the height of terror, one of the group members disappears, followed by terrifying sounds that echo through empty corridors. What seemed to be an adventure becomes a desperate fight to get out alive. Lucia discovers that the experiment victims were never buried, and their souls remain trapped, vengeful and thirsty for justice. In the end, only Lucia manages to escape, but not without carrying the marks of what she saw, and the certainty that, in certain places, death is not the end, just the beginning of something much worse. Want to dive into the last block? Here comes the ending you won't be able to get out of your head. But first, tell me, which of these stories left your heart racing most? Have you ever encountered something so inexplicable that you're still trying to understand it today? I really want to know your experience is what makes this space even more real and frightening. Oh, and if you're not part of our family yet, subscribe there. I promise it's different here. It's that place where we share not just fear, but welcoming, curiosity, and respect for what we don't understand. In remote Iceland, in a small village, surrounded by eternal glaciers, lived Einar, a botanist who dedicated his life to studying Arctic plants. On a solitary expedition, Einar discovered a hidden cave inside a frozen cliff, where flowers never seen before grew, of a red so intense, it seemed like living blood. Fascinated, he collected some samples for study, not knowing he was tearing fragments of an ancestral curse. In the days that followed, strange phenomena began to happen. Einar felt invisible presences following him, and his dreams became vivid nightmares, where a female figure with black eyes and pale skin called him by name, begging him to return the flowers. Each dawn, Einar noticed his body weaker, his mind cloudier. His health deteriorated rapidly, and macabre events began unfolding in the village. Animals disappeared, and residents began going insane, talking about the Blood Woman, a vengeful spirit who protected the cave and its profane plants. Einar tried to return the flowers, but it was too late. On the final night, wrapped in delirium and pain, he was found in the snow, with empty eyes and a frozen smile on his face. The cave mysteriously disappeared, as if it had never existed, and the red flowers were never seen again. What remained was the legend and a clear warning. Some beauties should not be touched, and there are secrets that freeze the soul forever. In a coastal city in India, in the south of the country, an old lighthouse that had been deactivated for decades began to be reactivated by a new caretaker, Rajesh, a calm and solitary man, passionate about the sound of the sea. The lighthouse, built during the colonial era, hid a history of inexplicable deaths and mysterious disappearances. On the first night, Rajesh heard ancient voices coming from the sea, chants that seemed to hypnotize whoever heard them. He began seeing shadows moving among the waves, figures with empty eyes that emerged from the depths to whisper forbidden secrets. Each time he lit the lighthouse lamp, something dark seemed to awaken, and the sea around the lighthouse became turbulent and red like blood. Nearby residents avoided the place and told stories of sailors who never returned, and of the spirit of a woman who drowned her own children, condemned to wander among the waves forever. Rajesh, increasingly obsessed, realized that the lighthouse was not just a guide for ships. It was a prison for lost souls and a door to maritime hell. On the final night, after a brutal storm, the lighthouse was found in silence, with no sign of Rajesh. Only his lantern still shone, illuminating the turbulent waters like a warning for no one else to approach. The sea kept another dark secret, and the lighthouse continued to be a living legend between sighs and whispers. These stories show us that, in all corners of the world, the supernatural can be cruel and real, and that fear is the only certainty amid the unknown. If you enjoyed traveling through these accounts, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Here, we don't just tell stories, but create a community where you can share your experiences, your fears, and what you learned from each tale. Share in the comments. Which story affected you most? Do you have your own story that no one believes? I want to hear everything. Because fear, when shared, loses some of its strength. And here, we are all allies against the unknown. Thank you for staying until here. And remember, sometimes true terror is not in what we see, but in what we choose to ignore. Until the next encounter, and may courage always be by your side.